So, hi, I'm Mary Scotton. I am a developer evangelist at Salesforce. Yeah. Well, actually, that's what I was yesterday. Today, I'm a diversity evangelist at Salesforce. And some days I'm an admin evangelist at Salesforce. So I kind of have these three different hats, which I like to wear on and off. So, welcome to my Mary Scotton Diversity Evangelist talk. So, and you're all so far apart. Come closer, come closer. So what I want to talk about today is, I've talked about this a lot in terms of hacking the tech workforce. I believe there are some people in the audience who attended a session at Dreamforce with the same title. It's not the same content. Thank you for coming again. And I was kind of going around going like, hey, inclusion's important, diversity's important, go be inclusive, go do diverse things. And people would say, that's great, Mary, but what do you want me to do? Like, what are the things? What things? Diverse things. Go, do it. And so I sort of started to capture, well, what are the things? And so what we're going to cover in the next little bit is kind of the what, the why, and the how, or the why, the what, and the how, one or the other, we'll see. But just, why are we doing this? What is it that we're doing? And then, but really trying to get to the how. So we're going to have a couple slides of just kind of setting up, like, what are we talking about? Why is it important? But then get the how, and we have some guest speakers. And so, just don't make any purchasing decisions based on what I'm about to say. My management would definitely like to be clear on that. All right, let's talk about what is inclusion. So before we can talk about inclusion, we have to talk about privilege and diversity. All right, so again, setting the stage. I'll walk around and be, inclusion in tech is important. We need to change the ratio. Things need to be more diverse. What do I mean by that? And so it's all connected, privilege, diversity, and inclusion. So we'll start with privilege. When I talk about privilege here, what I mean is access to benefits based on traits that you have that you do not control, okay? And so it's not just like, oh, I have the privilege to have a driver's license or whatever. I don't know. It's like, it's stuff that's going on in the world around you that you just really don't have control over, and you can't change the thing about yourself, right? I can't change my skin color. And I look at that privilege in a continuum, and this I stole from a TED Talk that's really fantastic. Anyone seen that? Yes? All right, it's down there at the bottom. Justin Ford. And when I talk about diversity, they're like, oh, that's great, you're talking about women in tech. I'm like, no, actually, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about diversity in tech. And that is actually all of these categories of privilege. And if you look and say, is everybody, in all of these categories, people with and without privilege, being included in tech, that's where I want to be. And so, for example, we all fall somewhere on this continuum, and we may have privilege in one category and not in another. Right? So I have ability privilege. I was able to come up the stairs. I was able to get in this building. I can go everywhere and know that I'm going to be able to get around in that space. I do not have orientation privilege. Right? The world is kind of set up for folks who are straight. And as a lesbian, up until last year, I couldn't get married, for example. Right? So there are certain privileges. And also, yes, I can get into any space, but there are spaces that it is not safe for me to go to. And if you've never been in that position, it's really not fun. So if you are someone who has never walked into a space and thought, I'm not safe here, like, that's a privilege. So good for you. That's cool. That's not my life. So, where we fall on this privilege continuum really kind of informs how we move through the world. And if you have privilege in a category, it takes empathy to understand what it means to not have privilege in that category. So I will walk into a space and say, what if I was in a wheelchair? What would it be like to navigate this store? Yes, I was able to get in the door, but I can't get down the aisle. And trying to have that empathy and put yourself in somebody else's shoes. So then that takes us to inclusion, which is, it's kind of a funny definition, right? Inclusion is the action or state of including, or of being included. Right? At first I was like, I can't put this on a slide. It doesn't mean anything. But it does. Because, again, if you have had that feeling of being included, you know how that feels. I feel welcome here. I feel safe here. I feel comfortable here. That's what it means to feel included. Feeling excluded is the opposite of that, right? I don't feel safe. I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel welcome. So my goal for our Salesforce community and the broader tech community is that everyone feels safe, everyone feels welcome, everyone feels included. And what we want to talk about today is the action part. How do you make people feel included? Right? What are the things that you can do? Before we get to that, of course, we get to the why. So I do have to cover this, because everyone's like, oh, Mary, inclusion, that's so great. But why? Right? Why does it really matter? Everyone is being judged on their skills. This stuff doesn't matter at all. We'll just hire the best people. It would be cool. Well, again, you want everybody to be included and to do their best work, and you want to make sure that there aren't biases in your hiring. But again, why? So first of all, does everyone know who this is? Right? So it's me, all right, on the inside. All right? So this is how I feel on the inside. I have never had hair like this. Maybe Dreamforce this year, but this is me. Okay. Let's talk about why. So why has to do with stats. So here are my stats slide. We are not activating, we are not using, we are not leveraging large portions of our population to be part of our developer community. And we talked about this in the keynote. Like, there are all of these jobs available. Tech is booming. We need developers everywhere, every company. And at this point, we are not leveraging all of our resources as a community. So women make up, in the workforce, overall, they make up 47% of the workforce, but only 18% of the tech workforce. Right? And again, diversity is not just about women, right? We said that earlier. You're paying attention? Okay, but still, like 18%, like you're feeling pretty bummed, right? You're like, I'm underrepresented. Well, Corinne, you are underrepresented. However, you're doing really great because you're not wildly underrepresented. So if you happen to be Black or Hispanic, you are 1 or 2% of the tech workforce. If you look at the numbers that have come out from Google and Facebook and Salesforce. And so now you're the only, right, in the space. And so it is very hard to feel included when you're that underrepresented. And again, it is disproportionate. So my end game is not 50-50 everywhere, all around. It's proportionate representation. And I actually learned that from Laura Weidman-Powers of Code 2040. When I heard her explain that, I was like, oh, okay, that is what is the end game? Right? So it is, the same representation that we have in the overall that we should have in tech. So, and why not? And so again, you're like, that's great, Mary. You showed me the stats. I don't really care still. Well, then I will tell you that the McKinsey analysts agree with me that diversity is important. So again, if you don't trust me, and I don't know why you wouldn't, but if you don't, other people have written about it and done research and studies and bits to say that diversity is important, right? Ethnic diversity and gender diversity make your teams more productive. So this is goodness. Another thing is something I heard recently. I met Judy Brown, who works for a company called Civic Makers. And it has to do more with, so you have more productive teams because they're diverse, but you actually build better products. And so what Civic Maker does is do hackathons. And that they're in the community, solving problems in the community. And their philosophy is build with and not for. Like, I'm not going to build a problem, to solve a problem that you have that I don't actually have, and try to solve this problem without talking to you, which we do a lot, actually. And we do at Salesforce sometimes, but then we bring in customers to say, okay, well, how do you use this product, or what are your business pain points, right? So that type of bringing people in who are your actual customers builds a better product. It'd be even better if those people were on your team, right? And then they're bringing that perspective, from the group they represent to your product design, right? So your teams are more productive, but also your product design is better. And so we have some great examples of product design from an organization that's known for its design. Right? Is everyone familiar with Apple? Right, okay. So 2 epic design fails from Apple. The first is the Apple Store, the glass steps in the Apple Store. Has anybody seen that? Google that, right? Yeah, so it's like multi-level Apple Store. We're going to make everything's glass. It's going to be beautiful, and the stairway will be clear glass. Corinne, would you please walk up the steps in your skirt in the clear glass stairway? Right? So was there anyone on that design team who wears a skirt? Probably not. Okay. Another one, which is classic, is the health app when it first came out in 2014. So it didn't track periods. It tracks all kinds of stuff, like random stuff, but not that. So how many people in here don't get a period? Okay. Anyone else? All right. If you don't get a period, you may not understand that it's kind of important to track that for a variety of reasons. Some of them are reproductive or non-reproductive, and some of them are health reasons. Right? It's actually super important. Why wasn't it in there? And I tried to find out if that team had women on it who designed that product. I was not able to find that on the internet, but I am going to guess that it did not. So again, it makes better product design the more diverse that your team is. So are we feeling it? Like, yes, it's important. You're like, I came here and set up to bots, so it's important to me. All right, let's talk about it. So what's the how? All right. So the main thing that you can do is add equality to your core values, add inclusion to your core values. All right, so if you do nothing else, you're like, I went to this talk that Mary gave, and I went back to work, and I added equality to our core values. Cool, right? Again, at the CEO level, having Mark Benioff talk about equality changes how people behave at Salesforce. It's a big deal, right? And so if you go back and look at your company's core values, and there isn't anything about inclusion or equality, and the health of your employees, that's something to think about. So Salesforce is doing that. Apple also did that. So I'm picking on Apple a little bit, but when I looked at their website, they have a really well-written, like, here's what we're doing, and here's the things we've tried. I don't know if it's actually working or not, but they're saying it is a little bit, right? So again, we want to get to the how, like what companies are doing and how they're doing it well. And Civic Maker's the same thing. I was just at GlueCon, and they're very intentional about their speaker lineup and also about their attendees. And so offering a scholarship for attendees. And being like picking the speaker lineup so that there's more diversity in that lineup. And then there's Impact Hub Oakland. How many folks know the hub? Woo, woo, woo. All right, we just started some office hours there, and it's just across the water. There's a town called Oakland. I used to live there, and radical inclusivity is one of their core values. And it is a space that I have been to and is the most inclusive space that I've ever been in. And so I thought I would ask Ashara over IM one night. She was like, if I knew you were going to put it on a slide, I would have maybe thought through it a little more. But I said, what are you doing? Like, so you say inclusivity is part of your core values, but what do you do day to day with your employee team to make that space so inclusive? So here it is, all these things. There's another slide with more things on it. And it was just fascinating to talk to her because it was not hard for her to think of these things, right? These are things that are just part of the nature of their business. And at first she said, it's about your heart, right? Like, are you feeling inclusive? Do you feel welcoming of everybody? Or are you, for some reason, like, keeping people out? So here's some more, right? And being overt, right? Like, Black Lives Matter, everyone's welcome, Muslims are welcome. Like, we are open to everyone here, and you will be safe and comfortable and welcome in this space. And that has made their business more successful. So they had more members at their co-working space in the first year than any other hub had, of the hundreds of hubs in the world. So again, if you're not doing it for the love, do it for the business. It makes a better business. And so I thought that was great. I talked to Ashara. That was wonderful. However, there are some folks in the house. Deborah Weller, come on up. So, turns out that I wanted to have some kind of real-time conversations, hopefully. And I'd like to introduce Deborah Weller from Pivotal. So Deborah, we were chatting, right? We go way back to yesterday, where Deborah had the opportunity to chat with me for a minute and told me that she had seen my Hacking the Tech Workforce session at Dreamforce. So Deborah, from that point, then what happened?
So, first of all, I've been stalking you for years. So,
Well, so let's not talk about that now.
Okay.
Right.
Put that on the down low. But no, I did go to your session at Dreamforce last fall, and really some of the stuff you said about how to take back and think about how you have the bias. What are you seeing in your feed? How can you diversify the voices that you hear and the people that you hire? How can we get more people into the hiring platform? So the company I work for, Pivotal, has done a really good job with that. For our sales kickoff, or actually worldwide kickoff this year, diversity was a huge part of it. We have a Slack channel on diversity where people might shy away from that a little bit. It's a very open channel. You can talk about a lot of different stuff on there.
Yeah, I'm curious about that.
And there's been some really interesting conversations, really hard conversations. People not calling each other out, but really just bringing stuff to the front. And you're like, I didn't know that. I never thought about it that way. I've never had to deal with that in my life, but this is awesome. And it's been really good and really helpful. I think we have that as one of our core values, diversity and inclusion. The other
so
thing,
was that true always?
Yeah, it's been Pivotal since it's spun off from EMC. That's one of the core values we've had. Part of the way we do development work is with extreme programming, pair programming, a lot of test-driven development. But with the pairing especially, you're working with somebody, you've got to have empathy. You've got to kind of check your ego at the door, because everybody can learn I can learn something from anybody. Right? I'm not the expert on everything. Using that pair and really fostering that relationship, you've got to work with your pair. It may not be like you, and it's great. The other thing, when I first came to Pivotal, they play a lot of ping pong. And I thought, I hate ping pong.
What? I love ping pong.
I'm not
I spent my youth playing ping pong.
Well, it turns out you don't have to be any good to have fun playing ping pong, so it's working great for me now.
Okay.
And it's all about how can you take a break, get work with your pair, but then have some fun and get out of your head. And so that's been good.
So ping pong is a plus? Like you should have ping pong in your office?
Yes.
Okay.
But really just the fostering that community of empathy and really get there. I'm also proud to say that we have a Girls Who Code workshop going on in our Palo Alto office this summer for 8 weeks. We've got Girls Who Code field days at our development offices, and then we just hired a female CFO, which is kind of awesome.
All right.
So we're making it's getting better and better.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that, Deborah. All right. I love the Slack channel, right? It is fraught with peril, but it is also, if you say this is a safe space, people be kind, but share what you really think, that can be a way to be transparent, right? About here's what's going on, or here's what I see, or I have this question. We have some folks in the Salesforce community. There's a WIT diversity user group, and Shauna Hughes and Toya Gatewood run that group, and they've said openly, you can ask me all of the questions that you've wanted to ask someone who happens to be a black woman, and I will answer them for you and not be offended, right? And that's a great resource. So we have that resource internally, and that group's become a really safe space to talk about different aspects of diversity. So if you're not familiar, it's in the success community with diversity. So I think that's great. And the pair programming, right? Like spending some quality time and talking about it openly, not just, we used to have women in tech meetings, and then we talk about women in tech, right? But when you talk about diversity at your corporate meeting, all hands, then it becomes interesting to everybody, not just the marginalized group talking about being marginalized, right? So our next guest is someone who works at a company that has been working on diversifying the workforce for a whole lot longer than I have. And I'd like to welcome to the stage Tiffany Price from Kapor Center. So, Tiffany had the unfortunate opportunity to have breakfast with me, and so is now going to tell her story. And I was saying, well, tell me, Kapor, I feel such good things, and you're there. I want to hear, is Kapor doing anything interesting internally? And then you were telling me about Project Include, so go. Nope. Can you hear me now? Yo, and the mic, in the back.
It's on.
Okay.
Hello. It's me. The moral of this story is don't tell Mary you enjoyed her session at Dreamforce or you will be in her session. So I am Tiffany Price. My title is a little different now. It's Community Engagement Manager at the Kapor Center. And one of the recent projects that Frida Kapor Klein, one of the co-founders of the Kapor Center, among other things, has been working with a group of pivotal women, 8 pivotal women, including Ellen Powell, Erica Joy Baker, Yvonne Hutchinson out of Oakland, to create Project Include. And for those who are interested in checking out the website, it's projectinclude.org. But they have tried to actually codify some concrete steps that folks in tech companies who are trying to create more diverse and inclusive workforces, that they can actually take to try to move that needle. So a lot of folks are talking about diversity and inclusion, but there aren't a lot of how-to guides. Of course, you can consult with somebody to come in and do trainings, et cetera, but the nuts and bolts of how you actually try to implement some of that stuff has not been spoken about largely. So they've been meeting at our offices. It just launched, like it's been maybe 3 weeks since they've launched, and they're continuing to test their model to figure out what more can they do. They're trying to get 501c3 status, and so it's a moving organism right now. But check out the website, check out some of the things that they have written about, and give them some constructive criticism or feedback if you'd like to do that. Another aspect of our work, so the Kapor Center is complicated. We have the Kapor Center, which is kind of the advocacy, philanthropic arm. We also have a seed stage startup supporting VC fund called Kapor Capital that also has a social impact focus and a focus on diversity and inclusion. And as part of their work, they created something called the Founders Commitment, where any new portfolio companies that come into the fold have to sign off that they are serious about diversity and inclusion. They want to create diverse and inclusive workforces, in addition to caring about social impact and being, pro-leadership of color. So a lot of the folks in our portfolio are diverse founders and women founders. But they actually start to, again, codify what some of the strategies are going to be around diversity and inclusion, and work with our portfolio services director and our internal team to actually implement those things over time. So hopefully going forward, we'll be able to report some stories directly from, early seed stage startups that are actually trying to create diverse and inclusive work environments from the beginning. So stay tuned. We also are moving into a new building in a couple weeks across the street from our current building at 22nd and Broadway in Oakland, and we will have a series of events. It will be kind of an open, there will be opportunities for folks to come have these conversations about race, diversity, and inclusion. We talk about race all the time in our office, so it's kind of funny to go in places where you can't talk about race, but
it makes people uncomfortable.
Yes, but our work environment.
But we want to make them feel welcome, so we don't want them to be uncomfortable.
I'm just saying that our office is very black and brown and white and yellow, and it's everything. So we talk about everything. So my goal personally is to create work environments where people can bring their full selves, where you don't have to curb any part of your identity, be it your faith. If you're going to be celebrating Ramadan, it's okay to talk about it and send, like one of our colleagues sent out an invitation for folks to join him at an interfaith Ramadan dinner, So things like people should be able to do that. That helps people perform better, connect better with other colleagues, and hopefully yes, increase that bottom line, which a lot of leaders are also interested in. So thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Tiffany. I hope we get to have breakfast again. That was really very useful. And having uncomfortable conversations. When I started doing evangelism and started to explore the diversity in tech and inclusion in tech arena, I had a ton of uncomfortable conversations, and I continue to do so. And I feel like that's just part of it, right? You need to be willing to sit with your privilege and sit with, like, I don't really know what's going on here, or I just got told that I did this thing that I really didn't intend to do, but wow, that was awkward. And I'm going to say, I'm sorry, right? And move on and learn. And so we were talking this morning about, it's not like, hey, I've learned everything there is to know about diversity and inclusion and we're all done, right? All the time there's something new to learn, and just be like, I'm a willing, participant in this journey, and I'm going to learn a little more each time. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, read my blog, because it's basically my journey of screwing up and saying I'm sorry and then learning some more things. And going into different communities where I'm not a member of that community and trying to learn and understand and be more empathetic, and then figure out how can I bring that back and be more inclusive. I had one other guest speaker, but I think he's scurried off. I don't see him. Adam, in the house? No, we'll talk later. All right, so the time we have left, I wanted to talk about some of my tips and tricks, and see if I can see my notes a little better. There we go. And my steps are the same steps I would take to learn a new technology, right? So if you're here to learn something new about Salesforce, right? You came here, you're going to get educated about it, right? You're going to network with the other people here and talk to them. And then, once you learn it, maybe you'll bring it back to your company, or maybe you'll teach it in a user group meeting. Right? So in that cycle of, get yourself educated, come up to speed, network with other people who are also on the same learning journey, and then turning around and teaching, or putting that into action. So that cycle, the same way we learn development tools, is cycle I use to learn about diversity and inclusion. And so my first step was to get educated about my unconscious bias. Okay. So how many people here have unconscious bias? Everyone put your hands up, okay? So we all have unconscious bias. And if you think that you don't, you're wrong. And I have unconscious bias. I do things all the time where I'm just like, Corinne could not possibly be a developer. Why'd you sit in the front? So it's like, don't have breakfast with Mary. Never say you went to one of her sessions, and don't sit in front, okay? So do you have unconscious bias? Yeah? Okay, probably, all right. So Corinne can't possibly be a developer because you don't look like a developer, all right? And so I do look like a developer, but I'm not. So looks can be deceiving. And so we all have this unconscious bias, and it's not about getting rid of it. It's about interrupting it. And so we can interrupt it in our brains. It's better if we can interrupt it in our processes. And so, for example, for our Dreamforce submissions, we are doing them all blind, in that we don't know who submitted or what company they're from, because I would just be like, Tracy, you're awesome. Of course, I'm going to pick your session. Right? I don't care what it's about. Right? So just removing that bias and not even giving me the option to decide I have the bias, try to undo it, and then get all caught up in, but if I pick Tracy's session, was I following my bias? Or if I don't pick it, am I undoing my bias? Like, I get all confused. So I'd rather just take out that possibility. So that's what we're trying, and I think we see that now with recruiting apps. Right? How do I remove the bias that is going to come up naturally? So unfortunately, the bias is in society, right? We're trained this way. So I just saw this morning. Our algorithms are biased. So I recommend not really Googling anything, but this is, on the left, the Google image results for 3 black teenagers. And they kind of all look like they've committed crimes. And on the right, we have 3 white teenagers. And they are all happily participating in all American sports. So this is, like, a pretty smart algorithm, right? It's like it's going all across the web and finding this great stuff for you. So the algorithm is biased. We had somebody unleashed their bot onto Twitter, and it was all racist. Like it's in the society, right? This bias is everywhere. Case in point, this gentleman. What is the first thing you think when you see this young man in a hoodie? Let's think. All right. So I met this young man at a hackathon in Oakland, at Impact Hub Oakland, and that was sponsored by Yes We Code. And Van Jones, who's the kind of head of that organization, he told a story about how Yes We Code was founded. And it was a conversation that he had with Prince. Moment of silence. After Trayvon Martin was murdered, second moment of silence. So Prince said, when an African-American kid is wearing a hoodie, people think he's a thug. When a white kid is wearing a hoodie, people think he's the next Mark Zuckerberg. We need to make more black Mark Zuckerbergs, right? Again, not that we need to change people's perception one at a time, but that we need to change the ratio. We need to produce more developers who happen to look like this kid. And that's what that organization is, charter is. So to create 100,000 high-level programmers of people of color. And so that kind of work, again, it's not interrupting the bias. It's like just leveling it up and saying, like, this has to become something that people see all the time, and then that bias will slip away. It's not a presentation at Trailhead DX without some Trailhead, okay? So again, how do you get educated about Salesforce? How do you get educated about anything? It's all in Trailhead. So I do recommend that you check out the Equality Trail. It is, just the start, but it's a great kind of way to walk through and, kind of think about, well, what do you mean by unconscious bias? What are my reactions? What happens in the workplace? And then again, what are some of the ways to interrupt? So, how long is it? It's an hour and 45 minutes well spent, if you want to check it out. The next piece, right, so that's the educate piece. The next piece is networking. So you're all here. And so the ability to network within this community and, again, across groups, right, taking a look at, who are you hanging out with? Who's in your circle? And who should you have breakfast with or go to coffee with? And so one of my big kind of soapbox points is the importance of going to coffee, the importance of building community and building one-on-one personal connections. And I spoke about that at the Southeast Dreamin' keynote a lot, and it sparked a lot of people to go to coffee with people that they had not met, but maybe were friends with on Twitter or, kind of in that same circle. But to get to know somebody personally, right? You understand their values, you understand, what do we have in common? Because by nature, we are drawn to people who are like us. Right? It's like a thing that we just do. And again, it's not like a bad thing, it's just a thing we do. And so, you can wake up in the morning and, look at your social feed and say like, oh, who are all the people in my circle? Who are all the people I'm following? And if you look like me, your feed might look like this, right? So this is kind of where I was totally 3 years ago. So thank you, I appreciate that. Seriously, like I was only following, people who happen to be white, people who happen to be cisgender, and people who happen to be on TV. No, people happen to be in the Salesforce community. So I had to consciously, intentionally diversify who I was networking with, and I did that through my feed and starting to follow one person, and I started following Ashara, right, from Impact Hub Oakland. And then who is she retweeting? And then I check them out and say like, okay, I really like what they're saying. I'm going to follow them. And it slowly grew my network. And I found out that there's like all kinds of stuff going on that I don't know about. Right? It's not in my feed. There are events that are happening. There are issues in the world that are happening that I had no visibility into because it wasn't a part of the community that event is happening to. And so it's really worked out for me. And so you can try this game at home. So what I did was I gamified, right, diversifying your feed, and starting with the bingo card to say, you know, again, thinking about that privilege continuum and the different facets of diversity. And so, you know, who am I following? Is everybody kind of all matching me in all of that continuum? And, you know, how can I learn more about that transgender community? Well, if I don't know anyone who's transgender, it's going to be kind of hard, right? I can Google it, but it's different when you actually know somebody. And so going through the bingo card is just, you know, and it's not perfect, and it's not, you're going to hate some piece of it, and I apologize already. I'm sure that you don't like it right now. But I did my best, again, to kind of cover all the categories I could think of. There are probably more. So it's a fun game to play. We did it with our team. I suggest you check it out on maryscotton.com. And you can print out these cards. It's super fun. And just, it starts the conversation. And you can kind of see where your gaps are and say, oh, this is a community I don't know anything about. And so, like, millennials, whatever, what are they doing? Huh? I read some stuff in the news about them, but I don't know any of them. I hear they're lazy. And, I don't know, entitled, Rebecca. But, I mean, you know, once you meet somebody, you can find out that they're actually pretty awesome. So give it a try. And so the last piece is about, you know, taking what you've learned on your journey and sharing it with others, right? So that could be giving a talk at an event. That could be calling somebody out at work when they say something like millennials are lazy, you know? And you say, well, that's just not really the right thing to say. And the folks I have here, so one of the gaps I had, turns out, once I started to diversify my feed, is that I failed to have anyone who looks like this gentleman who also had the mistake of sitting in the front. So I'm not like hanging out with any white dudes, right? And certainly not any straight white dudes. And so I started to diversify my feed probably like 6 months ago. And I realized that some of these gentlemen could be my strongest allies, right? Because they're in that privileged position, and they can call someone out in a meeting for interrupting a woman over and over and over and over again. Or say, wow, that was like the most racist thing I've ever heard anyone say. Don't do that. It's not cool, right? So using their power because it doesn't hurt them, right? It's less risk than if that woman in the meeting tries to say, like, what, right? Or if somebody's saying, hey, you're being racist. And it's just using that privilege for good is something that we've started calling being an accomplice. So I had read an article by somebody else about, okay, it's one thing to be an ally, you know, and you're like, good job, you're doing great, keep going, right? You're like on the sidelines while that person's running their race. You're like, woohoo, I'm an ally, right? An accomplice is the person running in front of that person, moving shit out of their way, right? And like, let me like actively get involved in your situation and take some risk, right? So if Leah and I rob a bank, right, and she's my accomplice, then we're both going to jail, right? So stepping in to say, I am willing to be an accomplice, I am willing to kind of step out of my comfort zone, have uncomfortable conversations, and use my privilege to create access for folks who are in underrepresented groups, that's super powerful, and that's being an accomplice. And so I started to make a list of the white dudes in my corner. And you may know some of these folks, Mr. Eric Dreschfield. Stuart gets on our WIT diversity calls and is like, hey, how's it going? I'm Stuart, you know, and is like super underrepresented. It's really fun. Mr. Adam Seligman, who has been a supporter of mine. You may know him. He was in the keynote yesterday, right? He's been just a fantastic accomplice because he isn't just saying, oh, Mary, you're doing a great job, keep going. He's like, here's some money, right? Why don't we sponsor a diversity scholarship at GlueCon, right? Here's, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. Matt Lacey is one of the first people who had me on a podcast and like talk about this stuff openly. And just, hey, Mary, what is it that I can do? So, and James, who came to our group talk, which we're not supposed to talk about. Okay, I won't talk about it. He asked me this question, sort of like, hey, when my friends say this to me, how am I supposed to respond? Like, I want to help. Tell me what to say. And so I feel like having this set of allies has been super powerful for me. And so I'd love everyone to be an accomplice in this, and we can continue this conversation, take it outside. So next step is that we are doing a inclusion in tech campfire downstairs in one of those campfires. I don't know which one, at 11:30. And so I think it's at 11:30, anyone, sometime. 11:50? Come on. Man, I want to eat lunch at that point. What are you talking about? Let's go into the events app. Please hold. Does anybody have a program? So what I'd love to do is say, okay, I talked a lot. We had some guest speakers, but I want to actually hear what everybody else is doing and questions people have. Again, it's a safe space. Ask lots of questions. And, we're going to, hopefully, some of my accomplices will join us and be able to, have a richer conversation in that space. So we're not going to do like a mic thing. We're going to do a kind of sit around and the campfire and talk to each other thing at.
It's after lunch, though. Lunch is at 11.
Lunch is at 11? What do I want?
Lunch is at 11:50.
11:50 in the Twilight Campfire. Oh, I got tons of time. Get something to eat. So have lunch. Talk to each other at lunch. Talk to someone who doesn't look like you at lunch, all right? And then come back and report about it at 11:50 downstairs in the Inclusion and Technology Twilight Campfire. I would like to thank Deborah and Tiffany for being willing accomplices. And thank all of you for joining me rather than going to hear about bots. Thank you.
Welcome, Trailblazers, to this session. We are going to be giving an introduction to JavaScript security in general, and more specifically to the Lightning Locker service. My name is Joshua Burke. I'm a developer evangelist here at Salesforce.com, and I am delighted to be joined on stage by Mr. Doug Chasman. Doug, why don't you introduce yourself and tell them why I dragged you up here.
Doug Chasman. I'm a distinguished engineer at Salesforce and work in R&D, specifically focused on Locker and Locker service, and mostly security for the last couple of years. Trying to get this out there so that we can get all the benefits that Josh is going to go through, in addition to security, all the other stuff.
All right. Well, before we get too far along, obviously we always have to talk about our forward-looking statements. If we're going to make any purchasing decisions, those should be made on current features and not any future-looking statements that myself or Doug might make. Now, I usually use this to kind of conditionalize if we are planning on doing so. And this session is actually kind of interesting because we're right in the middle of a release, right? And Locker service is tied to summer 16. So take this with consideration. Most of what we're going to be talking about is going to either be available to you currently or very soon around the corner, but we might also talk about some future plans when it comes to Locker service in general. So what we really want to do is give you really kind of a broad introduction. So let's talk about generically security when it comes to JavaScript. Now, how many JavaScript developers do I have in the room? Okay, if you're in the session, I'm assuming a lot of you are, but for those of you who did not raise your hand, JavaScript is actually kind of an interesting language when we start working with it. One of the first things you learn as a JavaScript developer is that the language is what we call loosely typed. And loosely typed means it doesn't really care if something is a text or an integer, and if you tell something that it's a text, you can also then tell it's a number later on. And at the end, the quote from JavaScript developers is everything is an object. And since it kind of goes back to being an object in a primitive state, you can redefine something very, very easily. And then if we look at the kinds of things that JavaScript is really good at, one of the things that it has when it's running in the browser, it has the ability to detect and manipulate what we call the DOM, the Document Object Model. And when you're looking at your web page in the browser, the DOM is the structure that is running all of the things that you're actually seeing within the browser itself. But aside from the actual visual things that we're seeing, JavaScript also has a lot of control over the event structure, over the window that we're looking at, over the location that the browser may currently be. And then in some instances, we may want to control some kind of concept of persistence, right? So HTTP by itself is a stateless concept, so we may want to store a cookie or throw something in local storage so that we can have some statefulness. Now, Doug, as a developer, all those things sound awesome, right? This gives me a lot of control. control, gives me a lot of flexibility. So what could possibly go wrong with all of that?
There's an awful lot that could go wrong. One of the things that we run into that we're going to go into in more detail, but a lot of this was designed thinking of a single author, somebody who authors the page. Maybe now it's a team of people that are working on that, but they're all coming from one organization. It's not the case that we have with Salesforce, where we have multiple authors contributing components. You're assembling things, you're installing things from AppExchange, getting content built by partners or ISVs, and then your own content. And of course, we're one of the biggest ISVs in that equation ourselves, producing lots of components. How do you take all of that jumble and make it make sense in what I used to describe, actually still describe, it's getting better, as the most hostile environment for a shared runtime that I could envision? It's getting better, though. And we're going to talk about some of the technologies that we've assembled. Some of them we've built, some that we've got just from the browsers themselves, that we've sort of mixed them together in a creative way to actually solve a lot of the issues that come into play with this, while still allowing you to have the full power of this whole infrastructure.
So we want to be able to keep that flexibility of the language and empower the developer to also be able to do it in a very safe way. And from a security point of view, when we look at the level of flexibility that JavaScript gives you in the browser, one of the most common kinds of security exploits that just not even from a Salesforce point of view that we see out there in the wild is something called XSS, or cross-site scripting. And the power that we give JavaScript is one of the reasons why XSS is actually something that is possible. So this is a very, very high-level look at what an XSS attack might look like. It starts with being able to create some kind of dynamic content. So I can do a document.write, I can manipulate a DOM object, and the user can provide that content itself. And then that content is being delivered and shown within the website. Well, now, as the user, if I decide I want to become the developer and inject some code into that dynamic content, and that code is not getting properly parsed, now instead of just adding some personal content to a website, I'm actually putting my own JavaScript into that website. Now think back to that previous slide of all of the different things that we can do from a JavaScript point of view. And if we're not tracking what's going on from a JavaScript point of view, we have now given a third-party author a lot of control into what we see as our first-party site. Now, one of the reasons why there's a couple of different things we're trying to defend against with Locker Service. XSS is just one of them. One of the reasons why I wanted to kind of show it, though, is because it demonstrates relatively well what you can see with a proper exploit. Now, not surprisingly, finding a really good, solid XSS exploit to demo on the web is actually very difficult, because most people don't really want to just leave an exploit on their website in order for you to see what it looks like. It's a little bit dangerous. There are a couple websites out there that are intentionally insecure. They're not really for demo purposes. They're actually basically for test purposes. Like, you can go and try and attack them to see what kind of angles are out there. So they don't really demo well. Google has a great demonstration. So this is actually an entire page that I have here, and I'm just going to skip down to the middle portion to give us kind of one visual demonstration of what might happen. What they're doing is they're just boxing this into basically a virtual XSS attack so that we can see what would happen, but nothing's really necessarily seriously at risk. So they're using this generic kind of social media concept. They're calling it Blatherbox. And so think of this as the personal feed of one of your friends, and so this is publicly available on the net. And if I go into the feed and I just say something like, "Hello, Astro," and hit share status, it just puts that, that update like you would expect. But then, if I put this HTML in here, now notice it's a broken image tag. The image tag is intentionally broken, and the broken image tag is going to have the on-error event triggered because the image tag is broken. And so now, if I put this image tag in here and put that into my feed and hit share status, you see, sorry, the pop-up is very small, but my JavaScript is forcing that pop-up to work. Now, anytime I come back to that page, the JavaScript has been embedded into that broken image, and the JavaScript is going to be run anytime anybody comes back to that page. I've made it part of that page. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, okay, you've made a pop-up happen. How horribly malicious can a pop-up be? Well, what if it wasn't just a pop-up? What if my code was working against something a little bit more persistent, like the cookie that is storing your session? So the cookie that is storing your session, I have now grabbed, and I've now put that into a pop-up. Okay, now we're getting a little bit scarier, because now anytime anybody comes to this page, if they've come in the time span to which this session has not expired, I can grab that session and I can impersonate you. I can now be you on this social network. And so if I take that consideration, going all through my exploits, right? They stack one on top of each other. It's the other problem with using pop-ups at any demo, by the way. But if we want to get really, really kind of take control over somebody's web page, now I have, remember all that flexibility we gave JavaScript. Okay, so because we are not properly trying to figure out what this JavaScript is doing, this person has now completely taken control over somebody else's feed, somebody else's personal social experience. Now, this is a very visual demonstration of what might happen, and that was the intent. But what are some other things that we could do with it? What if we were actually a little bit more nefarious about this? If I've hacked your personal social account, I probably don't want you to know that I did it. I'm not going to put that into a pop-up. I'm just going to slowly start stealing information from you. I'm going to send that over to my website. I'm going to start tracking your key logging. I'm going to know what your username and your password is. Or I can do things like manipulate the URL to send to a site that looks a lot like what you would expect, but now when you put your information in, you're actually on my third-party site, and now I'm stealing your information directly. So unfiltered, when we give JavaScript this level of access, it can cause all kinds of interesting harm to the websites that we're running. Now, if we take, so that's a very generic point of view. But from a Lightning framework point of view, we have to consider this in terms of components, right? And so components, when we look at an application right now in Lightning, we're looking at multiple components. And I believe this statement is true, right, Doug? Out of the box, pre-locker service, components have DOM access to each other, shared access to the window, shared access to the event, and any API that I'm smart enough to find, right, I can discover. So what have we added to the equation?
So that's 100% true. This is what we've been focused on. So both the XSS attacks, which are scary because they're not direct attacks, is one of the things. It's one of us in this room making an honest mistake usually, and not properly guarding. And there are ways. There's ways to mitigate the risk. We're going to talk about a technology that eliminates the risk, and it's not just locker service. It's something we get from the browser. But the real challenge with that is what Josh said. There's the attacks that are happening that are scary are not the ones that let you know. They're the ones that silently go in there and take you over completely, and it's because of a very innocent mistake. We see these mistakes in security reviews, both internally and external security reviews for App Exchange reviews. We see these on an order of at least 1 or 2 a week, and it hasn't really slowed down. So that was the other reason that we've been looking at this, is you open up a hole, and there's people out there constantly looking, and Salesforce and all of your apps have become a much larger target as we get more and more successful together. So we're becoming a really interesting place for people to want to compromise. So that's the other reason this is really becoming more and more important. Security is also not a steady state, which is, as somebody now I'm actually, somehow along the lines I got into the security business, and that's been one of the interesting things for me to realize is this thing is an arms race in a lot of cases, and there's a lot of techniques that seem like they would be secure, and then you actually start to look at them and you realize that's just giving you the TSA sort of sleep at night. Yes, this is a secure environment. We're trying to do something a little, sorry if anybody is associated with TSA. Great service, makes me feel safe.
We love you and we like to make it to our flight on time.
Yes. So now I can see I'm gonna get TSA jokes in the other direction about that, right? For locker service. Why do I have to deal with this thing? It's making me late, slipping my schedule. So we've actually attacked all of this. So There's a different type of surface area that we're dealing with because of the multi-author stuff that we were talking about. Multi-author across space and time. So we're all working together, but we're not really working together. We're each building our own content on our own timelines, deploying on our own release schedules, and people out there that are purchasing our components, installing our components, are doing that and assembling them in ways we never anticipated. Like the level of creativity that I see every day is amazing, and we want to foster that creativity. But at the same time, this is really not good. So if I'm thinking about things like I'm running a financial application, for example, and I then also, as an admin, install a really cool weather widget. That weather widget has full access to all the data I can see as a human. And the threat analysis that was done, when the risk analysis and everything else, threat modeling, that was done when that admin hopefully did threat analysis and hopefully had a security review, was thinking about this role or profile and user has access to this data. Yes, they should be able to see the weather in their area, and they should be able to see their financial information and their HIPAA and their other personal information. But the components that make up that visualization, nobody really thinks about that. Those really have no business. The weather widget should not have any access to my health records at all. But that's actually the world that we live in when we start doing these composite UIs. And so that's been my mission for a couple of years now, is to make sure we can still support those really the kind of apps that you want to be able to build and assemble, but do them in a safe and secure way so that you can't have data siphoning and other things. There's also a lot of other reasons. This is the security side of it. We talk about other.
And to clarify as well, because so we were looking at kind of like a single application before when we're seeing that like Blatherbox attack, but Lightning is a multi-author, as you're saying, many components working, and so we're moving up to what is Locker Service and why it's designed. But one of the reasons, one of the really, like if I have component, and then I add that weather widget in, and then I add another component, how many insecure components does it take in this model to make an insecure experience for our user?
Oh, just one.
Just one, right?
Definitely.
It's just one.
It's the weakest link on this.
Right.
So you'll also see a common theme throughout Locker Service is not just one level of protection. We do belt and suspenders, multiple layers, Russian doll, take your, whatever your favorite metaphor is for that. And you'll see us doing more of that, not with impact. The impact that you're going to see now with Summer, that's the footprint we expect to have going forward. It's not going to be any safe harbor, but it should not be tighter than it is today. And the lion's share of changes that we're asking people to make are now. We're trying to make sure that they were all front-loaded so that we don't have now you have to be Locker Service 3 compliant. And of course, I don't have a crystal ball. It may be that we run into something that requires us all to work together again to thwart that next level of attack sophistication.
Yeah. But the goal is to make a secure application framework, not to play whack-a-mole.
Definitely.
So, with that, hopefully we've scared you enough to be introduced to why we are talking about Locker Service. So let's now go to the completely other side of the fence. And Doug, can you give us just like, what is the elevator pitch of when I tell a developer what Locker Service is? What's the short version of what we're adding to the Lightning framework?
Yeah, I don't do short versions very well.
I know. I've got the timer on. Don't worry.
Actually, you've got most of it captured here, this is what a lot of people have focused on, definitely internally within Salesforce, has been when I've worked with our product security team. We're very, going after cross-site scripting and similar security, unrestricted DOM, all that. Calling undocumented and private APIs. This one sort of falls into a different category, though. The other ones, these were attacks. What's this one? This doesn't mean that you're calling something that is going to give you privileged access. It could, but let's say that it's not. It's just giving you something that we didn't sign up, we didn't agree as partners in all of this together. I don't know that you're calling that API. It's in there for my internal purposes. This is the same true of your own components. So for example, if you have in your components, you've defined Aura methods or Aura events, or the components themselves that are built of other components, and you only want to expose your intention is to expose just the coarse-grained surface area, not the fine-grained pieces. How do we protect against that? Right now, we have access checks, which I think most of you have experienced already. That's another part of our security and supportability infrastructure. This one fits more into supportability, which is private APIs and making implicit dependencies on things is going to guarantee that on Monday morning, your stuff will break some Monday morning. And a big part of what we worry about because of our model, our push model, and for partners and ISVs in the room that are using push updates, you're in the same place we are, which is you're taking a serious amount of trust from your customers that you're not going to break them when you change their code at a time when they don't anticipate. To keep that trust, that's what this stuff is all about. If we don't have APIs that we agree upon that are supported, there's no actual way to maintain that relationship. You are going to break at some point. Unrestricted DOM access falls into that also. We talked about it as if it was a security aspect, and that's the siphoning, data siphoning, and all that stuff is one thing. But what we also see is one component making an implicit dependency and trying to access the DOM of another component and relying on that structure. And that's an implicit dependency that is not maintainable. Your stuff will break, and we've seen this year over year. Locker Service attacks that problem also with a model of ownership where you have access no longer to the unrestricted DOM access, you have restricted DOM access.
And that part's kind of interesting because I think a lot, when we look at what the developer is getting out of the Locker Service experience, when I think of I'm the nice guy, I'm not doing a malicious attack, so why are we trying to constrain the code I'm doing if I'm not doing anything really wrong? I could be doing something that's wrong more from just an application the development level, that this is including in that. For instance, I know the application that my admin was putting together had a component here, and then I'm building that component out. And instead of using, say, events or an API, I just looked over the shoulder to that component, and I'm making my component run based off of that. And what we're saying is, eventually that's going to break, and we're going to box all of this thing up so that you should go down the more stable path in the first place.
Yeah, and these are well understood best practices for writing software, right? But we're bringing it to our component architecture, and we've had the primitives there. We've had the object-oriented primitives for implements and extends for components, methods, events. It's a pretty rich ecosystem and tooling that we have. Access control is where we start. Actually, it may not be the sexiest thing, but when we start looking at, okay, well, what about Lightning versus Angular, which I don't, and React, I actually don't like it when people talk about one versus the other. We can have another discussion about that because I see them as blending and complementing each other. In a lot of cases, Lightning is more than you need, and there's reasons not to use third-party stuff, but they do work together. But when I look at other frameworks, security, versioning, access control are the kind of things we start to layer on that are, it's a level of sophistication that you don't see in React, you don't see in Angular. Nothing wrong with those frameworks. They're solving a single author, single org type of problem. Try and load React twice in the same DOM. What happens? Try and load Angular in the same DOM, same version. It's not been authored with that in mind, and it's not a judgment call. It's not the business that they've been in. That's the business we're in, is thinking about this multi-author world.
Right.
It's sort of just a natural extension to the multi-tenancy that we've always looked at.
And then when we look at, so that's what we're trying to prevent. When we look at what we're now adding, where we're kind of enabling, we're already talking about some of this, better security, we're enforcing better practices, so you have more trust in the longevity of your components. I think the one that what do we, when we say cool new features like client-side API versioning, more specifically, what are we giving the developers there?
I love it that I work at a place where we can refer to versioning as cool, because it is cool to me. This is a lot of what I've worried about, and I've been at Salesforce 13 years now, and a lot of what my world is revolved around is access control and versioning. It's the same. I've been making the same pitch on various parts of platform for a long time and working on version enabling a lot of things. It's the key to this is, okay, we're going to provide strong contracts, API contracts, but a big part of that is your code that you wrote last week has to keep working, even though there's only one copy of the updated code from Salesforce, or when you install a package update, it doesn't create versions of the software, right? It's actually one version, and our whole key to our versioning scheme has always been single code base with version awareness and emulation. So it's a mouthful, but basically, you got the tip. That's what's been installed, and that thing, we tell it that whoever's talking to it needs to behave like version X. even though it really is version Y at this point. So it's not magical, but it's also something that, again, most systems, when you get the new version of React, it's a new copy of files. That approach wouldn't work for us because we have to deal with the fact that other people are using other versions of it.
So you're saying we're kind of giving you a virtualized version of the version that you need to move forward.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, which I think JavaScript developers would actually agree is pretty cool, right? Like we're trying to swim lane you down to success by offering just the kind of version that you need. Yeah. So that's what we're getting. I'm actually going to flip because I want to come back to that slide in a second. Now, Doug and I were talking about the level that we wanted to discuss Locker service, and we kind of agreed to keep it extremely streamlined from an architectural point of view, but we are also going to keep Doug on stage as long as possible, so if we have specific architectural questions, we can ask them. So instead of kind of getting into the weeds of how Locker service works, we really wanted to just kind of give like the very shallow overview. And so to do this, go back to that concept of all of those wonderful, flexible things that JavaScript can do, and then how are we going to kind of contain that in a way that's not necessarily getting intrusive into the developer. So when it comes to all of the flexibility, it comes with definitions and variables and things like that. The two things that Locker Service insists upon is that your code is going to use strict, and it's going to enforce CSP. And I just flip slides, so ignore CSP for a second because we're going to flip back to that and talk a little bit more about that. But CSP basically is going to also help us against XSS attacks. That's primarily what it does. These next three are variations of the exact same theme. So the issue, if I can go from one component to another component, and I can grab this component's DOM, and I can do anything that I can see with that DOM, I can grab the information and run with it, how do we give the developer the ability to keep using the DOM elements that they already know, that it's already in their code, so they don't have to go back and refactor a bunch of stuff for Locker Service, while at the same time making sure that they only see the DOM elements that they want. And what Doug has done with Locker Service when it comes to things like the DOM and the window and the event structure has created a secure version of those elements. And so you're still, well, your code, when it says DOM or event or window, your code remains the same, but what you're actually talking to is you're talking to Doug's secure proxy version of that. So as long as you're not doing anything that we're trying to restrict, your code is going to remain the same. And if we can't proxy it, then, like for instance, private APIs, we simply tell you that you're not supposed to actually go into that direction. Is that a relatively accurate? I'm the concise one, and then I hand it off to Doug. And
actually, that sounded great. And I know Josh doesn't want me to go too far into the secure virtual DOM and all these other pieces, which is actually not that complicated. If you look at React, uses a virtual DOM. But they're using it for a different reason. They're using it for performance reasons and for doing differencing to basically improve performance of updating the slowest API we all have to work with, which is actually the DOM. It's a fairly slow thing. So they went after this, and they're one of the frameworks that's popularized virtual DOMs. Before that, most of us would scratch our heads and go, are you kidding? You can't make that thing really work or perform or whatever. So I'm definitely standing on some shoulders, some big shoulders from the React folks, and Polymer is another framework that uses a shadow DOM. And some of these things are going to become they're starting to become part of the browser, but no one in the browser community has thought about it being a security layer until recently. So we're actually working with TC38 and a bunch of other these standards bodies that we now participate in, and introducing ideas like the secure virtual DOM, which I hope the whole ownership model we have for DOM nodes and the filtering, someday I actually expect that will move into the browser. And it'll be a service that the browser provides. It's really what I'm doing is just filling a gap. So we are that's another approach on this, is at some point it should be at the browser level, like lots of other things that we all have to polyfill or work around. But the secure virtual DOM emulates the current DOM standards. And this is an area where you've seen us probably do quite a few fixes. If you're doing your homework now and actually trying out Locker Service and pre-release, now it's actually out on production. We've been updating Locker Service on almost a daily basis, 7 days a week, fixing issues. As soon as you find an issue, you need to definitely let me know. There are some methods on the DOM that honestly, I'd never even heard of before. The most recent one was insert adjacent HTML. Never used it in my life. And it's supported on all browsers. It's not even a weird one. It's not even one of these ones that's only on this browser. I went and I had to look it up. Anyone ever used insert adjacent HTML?
Has anybody ever heard, really? So you've got one person. Anybody else
Ever heard
of
it?
certain? Really?
Okay, we got
so
it.
two,
Okay, so,
3. Maybe 0.5% of our current audience.
Yeah. So we will be supporting that shortly. And that one's a little tricky. I know I'll round it out here,
Sure.
but a lot of these things are nothing more than having a layer that when you talk to document.query selector, and you think you're talking to document, you're really talking to a JavaScript class that we've written called secure document, that we've injected around, we put it around your code, basically, because one of the things that we have that nobody else has is when you're writing your components, those components are stored in your org's metadata. Well, we actually have code that stitches all that JavaScript together and puts it into app.js or wherever else when we deliver it dynamically. That gives us a unique opportunity to put something around that code that allows us to make it look like you're working with window and document and even the global namespace, which is a somewhat tricky one to handle. We virtualize global namespace, document, the entire DOM, SVG DOM, and in a lot of cases, they're really, really trivial pass-throughs to just make sure that if you've got a DOM element and you access a property on it that would get you to the global window or the global document, we make sure that you get the proxy for that instead so that you can't escape out of this sandbox that we've created. The code's actually fairly straightforward. If you're interested, it's all open source. Everything I'm talking about shows up in the Aura open source project in the Aura Impulse/Locker, and I can give you links if you want to see how it works. Small amount of code, pretty standard proxy layer, except we had to deal with the fact that most proxy layers don't deal with things and make them, they're vulnerable to attack like prototype poisoning. I'm not going to go into the details of that one, but when you look at the implementation, because I expect a lot of you will, they're like, well, why didn't he use a prototype? Why is he doing all this stuff? You're not using inheritance at all. There's a reason, because you can poison the inheritance tree very easily, and if you can do that, all bets are off. So a lot of the implementation decisions are because of the goal of this is you can't get out of it.
You can't unravel it back to point 0.
Which is all the way back to strict mode.
Right.
Which is, we didn't implement strict mode or require strict mode. We put strict mode around your code. So it does mean everything. This means anything that you import. So any libraries that you're importing, jQuery, Angular, React, HighCharts, and like the long list that we've been testing with, they do have to meet these basic requirements of strict mode and certain aspects of content security policy.
Yeah.
Strict mode, though, isn't because we wanted to make sure that you were following all the best practices of strict mode. That's not necessarily a security issue. There's a little section in the strict mode spec that talks about security. And one of the things you can do without strict mode is you can walk the caller and callee chain, which allows you to jump out of this world and do bad things. Yeah. The other thing it knocks out is if you write a function today, just a free function, open paren, close paren, open curly, return this, close curly, and you just call it. Call this thing foo, you invoke foo. What does that return normally? Window. That would be bad. Because that actually would get you outside of this. And everything we're doing...
Backdoor all the way to the
another
native
backdoor.
window, and now you're off the rails.
People have tried to solve that with lexical analysis, code rewriting, all sorts of other stuff. There's a whole big discussion on every time someone thinks they have it, it's always been proven as being vulnerable to some type of hieroglyphic type attack. So all of our protections are runtime. That's why we have this proxy layer. Strict mode also knocks out the return this without doing any lexical analysis. It also turns out that that's what ES6 does by default. So this whole thing of being able to get window magically from a global function is kind of a thing of the past anyways. We're all going to have to move beyond it. That's why we use it, in case you're wondering. We don't really care that you're declaring your variables necessarily, although that one is very useful.
Right. And to be more specific, so this is why I want to kind of start with this and then fly. But just out of curiosity, how many people are using strict mode voluntarily just for code cleanliness and general standards? How many people have no idea what strict mode is?
putting use strict at the top of
you
your
starts use
scope.
strict at the top. So strict mode basically, and you've already kind of described it a little bit. Your code is not going to be allowed to be run effectively unless you follow. It's two different things. One is relative structure to your code. Don't define things, don't redefine things, and things like that. And then others are things like security policies against the DOM itself.
And most people focus on the structural stuff, and which, by the way, there's nothing in strict mode that everything that's in there to me is goodness.
Right.
So hopefully, take a look at it. You're gonna have to learn it anyways for various reasons, but there's nothing in there that is going to make your code worse. It usually highlights some really shocking things that you may
It's either
have.
going to make it cleaner, it's going to make it more efficient, or it's going to make it
also, you also get a performance boost because there's certain things there's some weird stuff the browser doesn't have to deal with anymore and maintain context. It can do a significantly better job of optimizing.
And so I just got introduced to myself not too recently in kind of the roundup to that, and that's one of the things I have found. And it's even things that you're habitually using that you didn't think was really slowing down your code, but Strict is going to point it out because it actually is. And then the second big thing that we're doing to enforce security is CSP. And I will completely confess that after about the third meeting that I had on Locker Service where the abbreviation CSP came up, I finally just Googled it. Because I wasn't entirely sure. But the short version, I believe it's basically a blanket set of policies to protect against that XSS hack that we just saw.
Yes, it allows us to knock out unsafe evals, which most of us have, we've heard it enough times, eval is evil, right? But we don't always know there's multiple forms of eval. There's the general eval, open paren, and put some code in there. That one, most of us have sort of moved past just because it's usually embarrassing if we use it, and somebody's like, why are you using eval? Eval's evil. And then there's the ones that are more subtle that a lot of frameworks actually still use, like the function constructor that takes a string of code. And why is this bad? Because it's on its own, it can be safe if you manage it, but it's impossible to tell by just looking at it from a software perspective. That where the problems come in is when somebody starts building up the string that gets fed to eval dynamically. And where it really goes south is when you start taking values from user-entered values, or even whether it comes in from the UI or is indirectly entered, and you start concatenating things together. And then now I have a playground to go in there and start getting arbitrary code that you didn't anticipate executing in places you really didn't want me to be in. So it knocks that out entirely. The other one is unsafe inlines, which is an old pattern for the most part. Yeah. There's still a few libraries that use it. By the way, I give you the long list of stuff that works really nicely under Locker, and the libraries and frameworks that aren't working, the ones that aren't working right now that have some issues, those issues are all my issues right now. And then there's a short list of things like CK Editor that was about a 13-year-old code base. This is CK Editor 4. A lot of us have used it. Salesforce has used it. The problem is they're working on CSP compliance for unsafe inline, unsafe eval, and modernizing their architecture in CK Editor 5, which is looking really good, but it's still at a sort of an alpha phase. So we're running into the same problem at Salesforce, which is why this policy, unsafe inlines, unsafe evals, is not actually enabled in summer 16. We're targeting and being able to turn it on. It's because this is page level, so everything has to run following this policy. We've had to make interesting and somewhat, in some cases, radical changes to the underlying Aura framework that powers Lightning to make the framework itself CSP compliant. We were using eval for basically to take your code and turn as strings that came out of your org, right? They're sent down to the client. We have to somehow turn that back into executable content. Well, we were effectively evaling that. So we've had to change the way things work so that there's no opportunity for data to turn into running code. And I'm working with a couple of other vendors. Sencha is one of them with EXTJS and Sencha Touch. Just started talking with, I don't know if there's anybody from Sencha here. Nope. Just had a conversation with them. Oh, yeah, great. Started last week talking about doing some knowledge transfer on what we've done with the Aura framework. Sencha has a very, very similar set of challenges to get to CSP compliance, and we've got some knowledge there, so we're willing to share that. So there'll be a partner, because we're Essentia a long-term Salesforce partner. We also use Essentia internally. So getting there is important. This is sort of strict mode and CSP are kind of the two things that there's no wiggle room in this at all. We all have to run against this, and it's not like I can come in with a polyfill and make this work. There's no way to actually knock this out with a JavaScript solution. So this is the one that worries me the most, and has always worried me the most.
This is the due diligence from a JavaScript developer point of view to make sure that we're following these two things.
Yes, and it's mostly it's indirect, which is the frameworks you're using today. I want to be really clear that we're rolling Locker Service out in sort of basically two phases. I said we don't want to try and make this thing this elongated process where you think you're done and you're not really done. There's two steps to it. We tried to go with one, but because of CK Editor and a few other things in our own infrastructure, we can't turn this on yet because it actually breaks Lightning Experience and a few other things, and not in a little way. It breaks it really quite horribly. First phase gives you the programming model, gives you the secure virtual DOM, gives you, and basically gives you everything that as long as you're not trying to attack and specifically go around, you're not, around us and do things that would get you to global window, you're good to go. So this is what's most important to us right now is make sure that you get what you need running and that you can exit as soon as possible. Winter, I think, is what we're looking at now, with confidence that you've met Locker Service compliance. I'm looking at trying to provide an environment mechanism where you could test with the full thing on before winter. Definitely by winter.
And using that as kind of a segue, so one of the things, so with the release on summer 16, some of this is to just get developers used to the concept of Locker Service in general, moving into this concept of strict, moving this concept of CSP.
You'll get everything except for, if you could be using TinyMCE. Yeah. Or CK Editor.
And then that will pass for now.
It will.
But for the code that I'm creating, right now the current iteration of Locker Service is going to let me kind of get up to speed to knowing that when winter hits, my code is going to kind of be working in perpetuity.
We'll be working on crystallizing that message a little bit more, and like I said, trying to give you a test bed for it. This is challenging for all of us.
Yeah, but to help along that, so this was the work of Kennedy. This was work of a couple of people who were working alongside with you with Locker Service, right? Okay. So we have the Salesforce Lightning CLI, and the two URLs I have here. I'm gonna do very brief two different demos, both of them kind of wrapped around the same thing. So what the Salesforce Lightning CSI does, there we go. Okay, and let me bump that up just a little bit more. So it's a Heroku plugin that actually runs locally on your machine. So it's not a Heroku plugin that's working specifically against your Heroku application. It's a Heroku plugin that is designed to run command line. And so what I've done, if I go into and just do it quick, I'm in a local version of a Force.com project. And I've used so Dave Carroll has a Sublime plugin. If you want to use Lightning with that and bring your Lightning components down through Sublime, you can also use the Force CLI. And the Force CLI has an Aura fetch, which will basically bring all of your components down to the local version. And then when I do that, and I'm sorry, I know it's a little hard to see, the Heroku Lightning lint, so linter is actually kind of another third-party library that basically helps you try to figure out how clean and how functional your code is going to be. So we've put something on top of linter to give us a little bit of a heads up to, is your code running under strict? Is your code doing something wrong from a CSP point of view? And so if I run this code that I have here is actually working pretty well. And it will give us actually the definition. The latest version is actually even better about telling us, is this a warning? Is this an error? Is this something that's kind of a yellow flag? Or is this something that's kind of a red flag? Now, I've moved this to just be one component. But if I move, I can actually just do the current directory as well. So I can either go right to a component, or I can run it against the entire org all at once. So basically, you point it to a directory. It finds all of the JavaScript files related to that directory, runs it against the linter, and then gives you the option to update it. And so if you're using this with Dave's Sublime plugin, you can run it And then Dave's Sublime plugin allows you just to code it right into Sublime, and then when you save it, we can save it back up, and then we can rerun the linter in the command line and basically see how we're slowly cleaning up our code.
Can you go back to the results from
Yep.
the CLI? So, somewhere
Maybe.
here?
One of these windows. There we go.
Okay. A week ago, this would have said somewhere north of 140 errors.
Right.
So one of the things that we got some very direct feedback on in the form of people sending me their 3,000 line long outputs from this and saying, okay, Jasmine, what's up with this? Because I'm not fixing 143 of these things, and a lot of these look like opinions. So we changed this and tuned it down a little bit because I got tired of being a mechanical Turk on these things. I did about a dozen of them. So now you'll see the warnings. The warnings are, we were talking about strict mode. These are the opinions that are sort of the JavaScript community guidelines. If you don't fix the warnings, you will be Locker service compliant. Fix the warnings. It's a good thing to do. A lot of times these are showing some interesting problems. Maybe not the unused vars, but there are some other things it's detecting that I look at and go, because I've seen a lot of these, the results run on some of our biggest ISVs, and I'm sort of like, well, that component couldn't even run.
Yeah.
Because it's missing like a curly brace at the end. So we've been trying to this, and this, another thing I want to stress is this is a tool to help you. Now I think it helps you more than it did a week ago because it's, the signal to noise ratio has been improved dramatically. Please let us know if there's additional things. There's also a way you can specify globals that this tool has no idea that you're using Angular or jQuery. So it used to really get upset when you'd see $. As a global variable, and it would tell you that
because it thinks it was never defined.
Yes,
so it doesn't know why you're suddenly using
its default
that
posture
level.
is that's really dangerous.
Yeah.
And gave you an error message that was freaking a lot of people out. That we have a mechanism. You have to go in and basically there's an annotation you can add to your code to tell us that you're using that. And eventually, all of this stuff will be baked into the metadata API itself, and the tooling API. So these are near term. We wanted to get the tooling out there. Getting it into and out on the cloud infrastructure is a much bigger scale issue. A lot of this technology we're using is based on ESLint. ESLint we're not comfortable running that at scale server side currently, so we need to figure out what our linting strategy and technology is server side. But this was okay because we could let you run it on your individual device. So that's why, but we don't use any of this to actually secure your code. This is a tool. So the source of truth is actually running in Locker service. This is way, way, way more restrictive in a lot of ways. Now it's not so bad. We've actually matched. It was telling you the APIs that you couldn't call, like set timeout, set interval. We've actually had support for those for at least 6 weeks. That was one of those patches that went out on a daily basis. We find it's something that's supposed to be exposed. As long as we can expose it in a secure way, we try and turn it around as quickly as possible. In a lot of cases, that's 24 hours. I'm not signing up for 24 hours anymore because that turnaround time means I actually have to stay up until about 2 in the morning to be somebody who's watching the release, and that's getting really old. So.
Okay, so I want to focus, because to go into that, so the moment of truth is I'm in Locker service is enabled, and I'm testing my code. And so this is, I believe, the most up-to-date information that we have. In Summer 16, automatically turned on in brand new Summer 16 orgs. It's also turned on in any older orgs without any Lightning components whatsoever. Older orgs with a Lightning component does not have it currently enabled. And it can be toggled either. For instance, if you get a new developer edition and you're getting Summer 16, there's a critical update that I can use to toggle it off. If it's like a pre-existing org that I was running 16 on, I would have to actually get that done by request. And then the goal in Windows 17 is to make it very simple. Locker service is coming. Locker service is on all orgs.
It seemed a lot easier to understand when we wrote it. Now I'm looking at this going, wow, this is complex. This is pretty much it. And we've been tuning this a little bit, which is there's some nuances here that I think it's important because a lot of folks in here, I'm sure, are ISVs and partners and have managed packages that they have to keep being able to install on new orgs that may have this turned off, or I'm sorry, may have Locker service activated. What we're currently doing is for managed packages, so a namespace package that gets installed, it runs with Locker service. Locker service is not really coarse-grained. It's not really org level. We just talk about it like it's turned on for your org or not. It can be turned on and off all the way down to an individual component, even an individual method if we really wanted it to. So the granularity, the grain we can play with here is pretty spectacular. What we've chosen to do to allow partners and ISVs, and this is whether you're a stack on AppExchange or not, and listed and everything, it's just any managed package, when it gets installed into the target org, that managed package's components currently run with locker service disabled. That's because we're in the middle of breaking changes. We can't have everybody that's out there have their business stopping event.
Right.
So we've made that change. That will go away at some point.
But right now,
Yeah.
if I get a new experience, the greenfield experience, that's going to get me locker service, so that I start with that. But if I have an existing experience, we're not going to break that experience.
Another change we made over the last weekend, actually, after a lot of discussion, new DE orgs, so brand new org, you spin it up, you sign up for a developer edition org, that has locker service enabled by default, but you can toggle it under the critical update UI, and that is new as of this weekend. It used to be that you couldn't do that at all. It was just sort of on and there was no way. The main reason we did that actually was because we were getting inundated with things that were getting misreported as locker service issues. And there's a lot of other developers, lots of other code being changed, and if you can't toggle, you can't tell. And there's too many things that might be locker service that gets reported, like access control violations and a whole bunch of other just basic bugs. So as much as I like that it's...
So right now, if I have code in production, I've got Lightning components in production, so we're not going to see locker service with that because we're not turning that into an existing code. What I could do is I could take my code, I could get into Summer 16 org, and after this Saturday, all new DE orgs will be Summer 16. I can test the code in there. If it breaks, I can turn locker service off, tinker around with it, turn it back on. And so currently the DE org is going to be kind of a test bed to give us that gray zone between breaking in production versus actually getting enabled.
Definitely. And if it breaks, don't be silent about it, please. Open a case if you have the ability to open cases. And I know some people don't. Which was a surprise to me recently. Just because I keep telling people, open a case, and it's not because I want to put it through a bureaucratic process, right? I want to make sure that it doesn't fall through the cracks.
Right. Okay, we're almost at time, and I imagine people have questions, so let's jump right into questions.
Yeah,
yes?
So will that ability to turn the locker service, will the ability to toggle the locker service on and off be a permanent feature that we always can do in orgs going forward?
Definitely not. So this is a transition phase for us. At some point in the near future, our target had originally been winter 17. I think because of some of these other issues that I talked about, that's looking unlikely. As much as I'd like to get it on as soon as possible so that we basically, at some point, we don't even talk about locker service. It's just there, and yeah, that's how you work with Salesforce. But it's not going to be a long-term thing. And every day we're getting it dialed in a lot better. So I think that's also, the number of cases I'm seeing, a number of issues, it's getting out there to the things like insert adjacent HTML at this point. It's like, okay, yeah, all right, I got to add that one.
Yes.
Do you have a list of JavaScript libraries and versions that work with locker service? For example, I think I saw you saying that the jQuery, the latest version works, but the older versions might not work.
So Farhan, I don't know is Farhan in here today? No, he's not even in. Who's in here? Ryan? All right, well, I'll just take it. Yes, we have a list. There's sort of a little touchy subject for us because we're not going to be in the business of maintaining this list. But the reality is I also have tests that we've developed, the hello world types of things for just about everything that's out there. And as soon as I find a new issue with a library, Chart.js, I think, was the most recent one, where it was literally it was a one-liner that's already, the fix is already rolling out to production, and that thing started working. So we're automating tests on this. What we're not going to be in the business of is saying this is the library that works. To be honest, we're still trying to figure out our messaging a little bit on some of this because we don't want to be the traffic police for this. The way I've talked about it is all the things we talked about. There's a set of characteristics that say that basically if you do these things, or if code that you're importing does these things, it should work. And if it doesn't work, then we fix it.
So right now, we really don't want to be in the business of controlling a white list of acceptable, but we're trying to give you the ability to test your current code, whether that includes third-party libraries or not, so that you can have some predictability.
And we are talking about sharing this list that I have internally. We're kind of going back and forth of it, like the versions of jQuery.
But it's a very fast-moving list.
It is a
right?
very fast.
I mean, it's gone from several numbers down to numbers, back up to numbers. I mean, it's not something which is easily maintained at the moment because it's a moving target.
That's correct. But if it's a case where, let's say that a new API shows up in the DOM, as it does, we will have to react to that at Salesforce to make that part of our secure virtual DOM. But that's a bug at Salesforce. Like, there's something we have to fix, and we are testing to make sure with new browser versions and everything else that any browser that we support, we're keeping an eye on making sure that we're current on the most current version of the DOM. The biggest thing is that the library doesn't meet CSP or strict mode. It's not going to work. Like, we can't change that. It just has to be. Those are the two invariants. If it is using insert adjacent HTML, that's on me, and we'll get it fixed. And we're signing up to fix that very quickly.
Yeah.
We're not dictating what versions you can use. We're basically saying this is the set of characteristics. If the code, and by the way, I don't care where the code comes from. Locker Service doesn't care either. Code's code. It's got to meet these requirements.
And I would keep an eye on developer.salesforce.com because we're going to probably be having a longer conversation and blogging about this and trying to show more specific examples and things like that.
We're
Alex.
actually working this out internally, and you'll get a better answer than that if you bear with me a little bit. I'm working with product management. I'm a developer, not the product guy.
Segue from what you said about no matter where the code comes from, for Visualforce, lots of existing code out there. How does Locker Service impact that?
So Locker Service, the only place where Locker Service comes into play at all in conjunction with Visualforce is if you're using Lightning components for Visualforce and you're actually using Lightning components inside of VF. And what that does is those components themselves are running in Locker Service. It has no impact on your VF content. But it's an excellent question because one of the things that means is you're not actually getting all of the protections because we can't turn on content security policy universally, and that's a page-level concept because, quite frankly, most VF pages, that architecture predates anyone ever knowing what CSP was, or it wasn't even thought of yet. So unsafe inlines were not unsafe back then, right? They were. It's like everything that evolved.
They were barely inlines back then.
So that's. But we're actually talking about that intersection with the VF team right now, because there may be cases where we can't turn it on automatically because we'd break VF, most likely. But that doesn't mean all VF pages would fail. There's a lot of cases. Very popular use of VF for a long time now is you use it as a web container for a single-page architecture app where you're using Angular or React or whatever.
Right.
Those are already probably compliant if we gave you a mechanism to tell Visualforce, yeah, actually, by the way, I want Locker Service fully enabled. So we're talking about adding an attribute to the VF to Apex page to allow you to tell us. We can't do it automatically, but to allow you to tell us you want the additional protections.
Effectively opt into Locker Service.
And so that's the kind of conversations we're having now, which is I think is really interesting.
So is that with Visualforce inside of Lightning then? Is that where you would it would fit into the whole CSP?
So Visualforce in Lightning is the other way around, where there's always an iframe and there's always a domain. There we're using a very coarse-grained hammer, right, that we've used for a long time, which is the VF page served in an iframe, and that iframe is served from a separate domain derived from, there we're using same origin policy. So Locker Service doesn't have any impact on there right now. You've already got a good isolation model there. What we don't have in VF is an isolation model between components and the secure DOM and that kind of stuff. And there's just no real way that I see to retrofit that. So one of the reasons to start learning Lightning.
Any other questions? All right. Well, if you have any other questions, I will be posting Doug's personal cell number on my Twitter feed. No, actually, we're a little over time, so we probably should go ahead and call it a day. Thank everybody. Thank you very much, Doug. And We are going to continue this conversation, so please keep talking to Doug and email him, don't call him, but yes, and thanks for having us.